Were you destined to be a lawyer?
No.
No?
No. Oh, no. You never heard that story?
No.
Never heard that story.
Oh.
All right. Well, no, I was going to be a coach.
Mhm.
That was my ambition. I, played in high school sports and had a pretty good record, and so I wanted to. My ambition was to be a coach,
Mhm.
and so I wanted to play professional baseball also,
Mhm.
and so my dad was very close to John Yocum,
Mhm.
and they used to belong to the Prendergast Club here in Jamestown, and they belonged to the town club, and they used to play cards together. And we didn't have football down in Frewsburg, but our coach Nick Fedorka, I had played basketball and baseball, and our coach down in, which is all the sports we had in those days back in the 40s.
Yeah.
But our coach Nick Fedorka, in 1948, he went to Faulkner because he wanted to coach football, and he told me, he says, Bill, he says, you come up and take a postgraduate course in Faulkner. He said, I'll get you in on a scholarship to play football somewhere. I think you're going to be good enough to play. So I thought, hey, that's a pretty good thing.
Yeah.
And I really didn't know what I was going to do anyway. So I went up to Faulkner, started practicing in August, and one day my dad's playing cards with John Yocum, and John says, what's Bill doing now? And he said, well, he's taking a postgraduate course. He says, postgrad, he ought to be in college. What's he doing? He said, he's a good baseball player. He should be playing baseball in college now. And so my dad says, well, why don't you talk to him, get him in? He says, well, we got a working agreement. The Tigers got a working agreement with Michigan and with Michigan State. If he wants to go to either one of those schools, he said, all I got to do is call up the coach, and he's in. And so my dad says, where do you want to go? Well, I said, I'd really like to go to the University of Michigan, but I'm not going to follow my sister because that's where she is.
Yeah.
She had matriculated there in the fall of 1947, and she was valedictorian of her high school class, and so I didn't want to follow my sister. Well, I didn't know anything about Michigan State, but that's where I decided to go, just because I didn't want to follow my sister.
Yeah.
So I went to Michigan State to play baseball, and I only played a couple of years, and that was I wasn't really good enough.
Mhm.
Robin Roberts and some of those players were a little better than I was, considerably.
Yeah.
And but it really fashioned my whole life because Michigan State was a land-grant college,
Mhm.
and land-grant colleges you have to take ROTC. Cornell was that way at one time, and so I had to take 2 years of ROTC. Everybody, it was mandatory for your first 2 years. And then, if you wanted, when you became a junior, if you wanted to go on, you'd get a commission in the service. You'd graduate, you'd be a second lieutenant, and so that if you ever went into service, you'd go in as an officer.
Mhm.
And you also got paid. They paid you for taking those classes the last 2 years. You got $50, $60 a month or something. And I thought, well, it's a good way to pick up a couple of dollars. So I took it. And then when I graduated in 1952, the Korean War was on. And I graduated in June, and the next thing I know, in July, I'm in the service, and it wasn't too long after that, I was in Korea. So now I'm over in Korea, and then the war was winding down, and then when the war was over, we got assigned to court martials. Any officer, if you know something about court martials, there's three types of court martials. There's summary, which is just done by the commanding officers, and there's that's just done very simply. You go before your commanding officer, and he decides what to do. And then there's special court martial, where any officer can represent the individual. And then there's a general court-martial where it's a capital type case, which is, you know, rape or murder or things like that. So I got assigned to defend a number of cases. One of them was sleeping on guard duty, and I had a number of cases that I had to represent these individuals. And so I'm a defense counsel. I don't know anything about it, but I'm defending these birds. And so then after I won a couple of cases, I sent home to my father. I said, "You got to send me a couple of books." I said, "I got to know about, I'm defending these people. I got to learn a little bit about the law." So he sent me a couple of books over there. And of course I became infatuated with it. And then I had to prosecute him after that. After you win a couple of cases, they put you on the other side. So then I prosecuted some, and then the next thing you know, I decided when I got out of the service that I was going to go to law school. So when I got out, I said to my dad, "I want to go to law school. Where should I go?" He said, "You go up and see Al Olson." And so I went to see Al Olson, and I thought, I'd like to go to Albany Law School because that's where my dad went. It's where my uncle Alan went. And I see you have a picture of him. He was the first county attorney here. And when he got back from the Marine Corps, my grandfather was a supervisor. We didn't have the county legislature. We had the board of supervisors, and my grandfather was the supervisor from the town of Carroll. And so he had a little influence up there, and we need a full-time lawyer, so that's how my uncle Alan became county attorney. And so at any rate, I went up to see Allison Olson, and do you remember Al?
Yeah, I do.
Interesting fellow, very bright, and he said to me, "Well," he said, "I suppose I've got to write the letter of recommendation for you." He said, "Your father wrote one for me." And so I never took an LSAT. I'm sure they had them back in the 50s there, but I never took an LSAT. And he wrote a letter of recommendation, and I sent copies of my grades from Michigan State, and so they accepted me. And in those days, they pretty much accepted anybody. They decided the way to handle it was give anybody an opportunity to go, but they flunked out 50% of the class.
Yeah.
So I mean, a lot of people didn't make it. And it's like when we sat down there, the professor said, "Look around." He said, "There's a lot of these people aren't going to be here next year," and they weren't. But that's how I ended up in law school, was because of I had no intention of becoming a lawyer. So it was the service, and it was really the sports that how I ended up. So.
And you came back to work with your dad?
And I came back and I worked with my dad for one year, and then at that time Charlie Goodell was our county Republican chairman, and Charlie and I, it's another how my sports influenced my career, is Charlie and I played a lot of baseball together. We played on the Marlin Rockwell team together, and I got some old pictures of the team with Charlie. And then we played up at Chautauqua. We played on the Chautauqua team up there. And so when Rockefeller was elected as governor of New York, then a lot of patronage goes with the party that's in office. And so we had what they call a tax attorney in the county. And the tax attorney was the one that opened the safe deposit boxes and had to look over all the tax returns. They're filed in Albany now, as you know, but in those days they had to go through the local representative. And Sam Conti was the representative for Chautauqua County. He was a Democratic county chairman at the time, and so Goodell, of course, could have named himself, but he didn't. He wanted some young lawyer that he thought would be energetic and take care of these things, and he told me, he said, Bill, he said, I'll appoint you, but in fact, he invited me down to the town club. I didn't know what he invited me down to the town club for, to have lunch with him. So we had lunch there, and he said, he told me that what the job was, and he said, if you're interested, I will appoint you, but you've got to open an office in Jamestown because you got to be available for the lawyers in the Jamestown area. The majority of the lawyers in the county are in Jamestown, and of course you're going to have to go to Dunkirk too. But you will, if I appoint you, will you open an office? I said, yes, I will. And so that he appointed me, and then I had to start looking around for an office. So the first thing I did, I went up to talk to my uncle. My Uncle Alan said, I've got an extra office here if you would like to use it. And I was going to use it because he was going to give it to me rent-free, and I talked over my dad. My dad said, well, he said, you know, you got the same name, and so you're going to get some good cases, and they're going to come in there, and you don't know whether they came in to see you or came in to see your uncle. And so he said, I think you'd be better off if you have your own office. And then you aren't going to have any question of who you are representing and whose case it is. And so then I started looking around, and I talked to Adolph Johnson. And Adolph Johnson, it used to be Jude and Johnson was the name of the firm. And Jude had died a year or two before, and there was a vacant office at the 400 of the Wellman building. And there were a lot of lawyers at that time in the Wellman building. In fact, there were more lawyers, I think, in the Wellman building than there were in the Hotel Jamestown at that time. And so I looked the office over, and there wasn't any furniture or anything in there. And but we had a secretary, and he said we can share the secretary. And he said, you know, she's really good about this tax work because I was the tax attorney for Chautauqua County before Sam Conti was.
No kidding.
So, and Eunice been my secretary for years. So you got somebody that was some experience. And I thought, this is really a wonderful thing. And so I went in with Adolph Johnson. We were never partners. We just shared the office space and shared the secretary, and it worked out very well. And of course, dealing with a tax attorney, I dealt with being the tax attorney, I dealt with all the estate attorneys, and I knew and I had to deal with all the estates because they all came through my office. Sure. And so when the time came when the surrogate's office became vacant, I ran for surrogate, and that got supported by all of the parties, and I never had a contest. So
Really?
Yeah. So
Terrific.
So now you know the history of. No, I really wasn't going to be an attorney. I was going to be a coach.
And here it is, through baseball.
Yeah, all
That's
through
right.
That's right. All came through the sports, you see. All came through that.
Just an aside, how did Charlie Goodell get the bug to be a politician and sort of what's his genealogy?
Well, I don't know. The reason, of course, he was the Republican county chairman of this county, and doing a good job. And you know, all the offices at that time were Republican. The DA, the county clerk, the county treasurer, they all were Republicans. The legislature, well, it was the Board of Supervisors then. The Board of Supervisors was Republican. So he was really the kingmaker of the county. And so when Dan Reed died, he decided maybe he ought to be the congressman. And of course, we were all interested in politics too at that time, and we supported Charlie, and so Charlie ran and got elected, and so I don't know how he became interested, but I know that a vacancy occurred, and
Yeah.
he decided he was as good a candidate as anyway, which he of course was.
Yeah.
I mean, with his ability, and then he became the senator, and it was too bad he lost that. He wouldn't have if it hadn't been a three-way race, probably any more than Bush would have lost when he ran against Clinton. If it hadn't been a three-way race, Perot took those Republican votes away from Bush, and otherwise Bush would have beaten Clinton hands down. But it's the way things work out.
Did you ever talk to Charlie about, after he ran for Senate, after he lost, about the perception that folks had back here that he kind of turned from a conservative to a liberal, and did that bother him at all?
No, it didn't. He felt that this area was a very conservative area,
Mm-hmm.
and when he represented the whole state, he had to be in tune with the rest of the public,
Mm-hmm.
and so he just he felt that he was representing the whole state, not just Chautauqua County at that time. And so, yes, I did talk with him, but that was his reasoning behind how he voted in that. And he was a very bright, very articulate individual. So,
Was he upset that the county kind of repudiated him?
no, I don't think so, because he stayed in Washington, and I don't know that the county really repudiated him. He would have been elected if it hadn't been a three-way race
Mm-hmm.
there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it was like the same thing happened out with Bobby Ventura. You see, he never should have been in there, but you had the Republican didn't win, the Democrat didn't win, and here's Ventura coming in with new ideas, and people decided they were disenchanted with either party, so they voted for him and put him in there. Well, that was the same way. That's how Buckley got in as a conservative, but he was a one-term senator, just like Charlie was. But it was just happened to be in the right place at the right time. Yeah.
Segueing back to Jackson, was really Alan Cass? Roland. I think you mentioned.
Yeah.
that was the
Roland
connection.
Cass.
Yeah.
Roland Cass.
Excuse me.
Rollin, yeah, R-O-L-L-I-N. Roland Cass was brother of my grandfather,
Okay.
and my grandfather was a supervisor in the town of Carroll, and his father was Frank Cass, and Frank had two sons, Roland Cass and Alan Cass. Alan was my grandfather that was the supervisor. When Frank Cass died, he had two farms. He gave one to Alan Cass and one to Roland Cass. And then Roland ended up selling the farm and moved to Jamestown, and was active in the real estate business. He lived up at 23 Woodworth Avenue in Jamestown. But he went to school with Robert H. Jackson, and I think his name is mentioned in this book that Eugene Gearhart wrote about Justice Jackson. And my uncle used to tell me a lot of stories about him, and when I gave the speeches, one of the stories that I never told about, and I don't know whether I ever told you, but I've told a number of people the story on the sides, and this came right from my uncle. In the school in Frewsburg, they had inkwells on each of the desks, all those old desks. And one of the boys bet Bob Jackson that he didn't dare urinate in the inkwell. Well, Robert Jackson wasn't about to be denied, and he decided that he was going to win the bet, and he won the bet. I didn't dare tell that story, but I have told it to other people. And he was kind of a character, and just like any typical young boy growing up. And my uncle used to talk about the pranks that they did, like taking the flag and putting it up on the roof, and they did things like that, and dropping bags of water on the girls, because they were up on the second floor, and they used to pull those pranks like that. But he was a very good friend. They both graduated from school, high school together. And Robert Jackson really graduated from Frewsburg, and he came up to took a postgraduate course from Jamestown. That's
Was that common?
I don't know really whether it was common or not, but a lot of people claim that he graduated from Jamestown, but it was really.
I think I've always heard that. We take.
Yeah, I know it. That's right, but it was Frewsburg, and that's fine. And nobody, and a lot of people say he graduated from Albany Law School. He didn't. He only went 1 year at Albany Law School. And when I didn't realize that Justice Jackson wrote the letter of recommendation for my father when he went to Albany Law School. Justice Jackson and my father were very good friends, both coming from Frewsburg, which is a small town, and town of Carroll. And when my father decided, he had gone to the University of Michigan for 2 years, and then he decided to go to law school. And Justice Jackson encouraged him to go to Albany, thought that was one of the finest schools in the state, and of course we know the University of Michigan is an outstanding school, but apparently with Bob Jackson's help, he wrote a letter of recommendation, and my dad ended up going to Albany Law School. And I didn't realize that Justice Jackson had written the letter of recommendation, but when Stephen was there, he had a job. He was working in the library, and he was looking over old files, and he had access to a lot of files and things. Well, he looked up my father's old records, and he found the letter of recommendation that was in the file that was written by Justice Jackson. And he could, of course, taken it, but he wouldn't do it. He just asked the dean of the law school. He said, gee, this is my grandfather, and I wonder if I could have a copy of this. And he said, sure. Yeah. So they made him a photocopy. So we have a photocopy of the letter of recommendation that Justice Jackson wrote for my dad.
Oh, interesting.
And so, of course, because my father went to Albany Law School, that's where I went. So really, Justice Jackson had a great influence on my life. Yeah.
Now, did your dad talk much about Jackson as he was going through the chairs of being the Attorney General, Solicitor General, and all that stuff?
No, he didn't. He knew him, and Justice Jackson used to come to Frewsburg every summer. His secretary was a woman by the name of Ruth Sternberg. And Ruth Sternberg, her father, Ralph, lived just a stone's throw from my dad's house. And so, of course, when Bob Jackson came home in the summer, he used to come down to see Ruth, and probably had correspondence for her to take care of. And so we'd see him walking around the town, and he'd stop and talk to my dad, and he always wore a beautiful white suit.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and very impressive looking man anyway. He was a tall and good looking fellow, and so you'd see him around the town in the summers, and that's about the only time you would see him. And of course, when he died in 1954 in October, I was in law school, and so I didn't get a chance to come home and to see the funeral because I was busy studying.
Yeah. Well, you've been doing some research on him, and you've done some on Jackson.
Yes. Oh, yeah. And his nephew is still here in the area, Harold Adams, and married to Mariana Gearhart. It's funny. His name is it's like Eugene Gearhart, and but one of the stories that I always liked about Justice Jackson was the fact that Harold was in the Army after the war was over, and he was out he was in Germany somewhere, and I don't know just where he was. Maybe it wasn't Germany. I can't recall the story, but he was in the service, and one day the commanding officer called him in and said, "I don't know who you are. I don't know what connections you have in Washington, but I've got top orders that you're assigned to Nuremberg." And of course he went to help out his uncle, Robert H. Jackson, who was the chief prosecutor of Nuremberg. But it's kind of a great story when you think about it, that the commanding officer wondered, what connections he got? Why is he going to Nuremberg? So that's where. So Harold was fortunate to be there for those Nuremberg trials.
It was nice of Jackson to track him down.
Oh yes, it was. It was wonderful. And of course, Jackson's sister lived in Frewsburg, and that was only a chip shot from our house. And so when we lived at 2 Run Street in Frewsburg, and she lived down on Main Street. Helen Adams, she was married to Percy Adams. Mm-hmm. They had the one son, Harold Adams, and so when Justice Jackson came to Frewsburg, he always went to see his sister Helen. And so we used to see him walking down the street to see her.
Have you recollections when the Nuremberg trials were going on, whether Jamestown, Frewsburg, you guys followed that much?
No, not a bit.
Yeah.
No, I don't recall. See, I was young, and I was only, 15, 16 at the time, mm-hmm. So I didn't have much interest in any of that. And so, the older attorneys would be the ones that would know more about Justice Jackson than I would, because, as I said, I used to see him occasionally, and I met him, but my was very, very infrequent.
Yeah. Now, Alan Cass, when did he die?
He died in 1961. Yeah. He.
Was he the county attorney up till then?
Yes. Mm-hmm. He was in the Marine Corps. When the war broke out, World War II broke out, he joined the Marine Corps, and he went through a lot of the battles in the Pacific. And he sent me home a Japanese rifle that he picked up over in Guadalcanal, had a bullet hole through it, which I still have. And he sent me a knife that the Marine Corps had issued over there. It probably wasn't his, but he probably got it from somebody.
Yeah.
And which I used for hunting deer a lot of times.
Yeah.
But I kind of treasured the knife because it came from my uncle. And then he smoked a lot, and of course in those days people didn't realize that smoking caused cancer.
Yeah.
He was born in 1911, and he died at 50 years of age.
Yeah.
He just died in 1961,
mm-hmm.
But he was 2 and 3 pack a day smoker. So his life ended. It was a short life because of the smoking.
Did your dad have his office here in Jamestown, or was it Frewsburg?
My dad had his office in Jamestown. It was in the Hotel Jamestown.
Mm-hmm.
And I can, of course, remember going up there many times, and when I was a youngster, to visit him. And they had a barbershop in the basement of Hotel Jamestown, and that's where he'd take me down to get my hair cut. He used to get his hair cut there, and I got my hair cut there. So.
Did he practice right up to the end?
Yes, he did. He moved to Frewsburg in 1948, though, but he was, in fact, when my uncle graduated. My father graduated from Albany Law School in 1926, mm-hmm. and Alan graduated from law school in 1936. And when Alan came back, he needed a place to hang his shingle, and he went in with my father. So it was Cass and Cass in the Hotel Jamestown building, and then they had I don't know whether they had a falling out or whether it was when Alan went into the service, but at any rate, my dad then moved to Frewsburg and had his office in his house in Frewsburg until he died. So
was he a real estate general practitioner?
General practitioner, yes. He had a lot of real estate, but he had a little of everything. He had a lot of matrimonials, and a lot of criminal cases. He tried several murder cases.
Oh, okay.
And oh yes, and he had the last murder case in Chautauqua County, where the defendant was convicted and executed. And he took that really very seriously. There was in those days, it was an automatic appeal. You had to take it to the Court of Appeals. And it went up to the Court of Appeals. He argued the case before the Court of Appeals, and lost the case, but it was a 5-2 decision, so it wasn't really a unanimous. There were a couple of judges that didn't think he ought to be executed, but he had killed a wife or a woman and a child. He'd killed 2 people, and it was a heinous crime, and he probably got what he deserved, but it didn't. My dad didn't look at it that way, and probably today maybe he would have been convicted of manslaughter or second-degree murder instead of the first-degree murder, which he was convicted of. But my dad argued the case. In those days, when you you had a chance to get it, the conviction commuted, the sentence commuted by the governor. So in all those cases, the governor heard every one of those. And just like the governor now of Illinois has commuted all of the first-degree murder cases, and there's a number of cases right now, a number of individuals on death row in Illinois, but because of some of these individuals, they've been determined to be innocent by the use of DNA evidence, which wasn't available in those days. And so the governor of Illinois has now stopped the execution of any individuals now. Well, my dad argued this case before Governor Harriman, and he said, I can remember my dad telling me at the time that he said, you know, Governor Harriman, he hardly heard what I was saying to him when I was making an impassioned plea. And Governor Harriman was thinking about his speech that he had to give that night. And he said, I knew it was in vain. And of course it was. And it really affected my dad. And when they executed him, my dad went on a toot for about 3 months. He didn't do any practice, and he drank heavily as a result of that. It bothered him that much. One of the reasons I never really cared a lot for criminal law myself, although when I got to law school in 1957, we got assigned to criminal cases because we didn't have any public defender, and this was all pro bono. So when you got assigned to a case, well, you had to represent the individual and do the best job you could, and you didn't get paid for it. And so all of the young attorneys back in the 50s and 60s, until the public defender went into office, when the Board of Supervisors created the public defender, why we got assigned to these cases and had to represent defendants, and were never paid for them.
Oh, wow.
So it was kind of interesting, but we all learned a little bit about criminal law, and of course it was mandatory to take criminal law at that time, and I had a whole year of criminal law at Albany when I went there. So I had some experience, but you got experience real fast when you got assigned to these cases and had to start doing the research and representing these individuals.
You've had a distinguished career here.
Not really.
Really? As you reflect back, what's the highlight? What's the Judge Cass highlight, whether it was private practice or surrogate's court, something that's...
Well, probably being elected as surrogate was really a highlight, I would say. I mean, here I never expected to be a judge, and it was always my ambition. In fact, I really kind of planned it after I got reading about Justice Jackson and in law school and reading all these judicial decisions like Benjamin Cardozo and all those people. I thought, what a wonderful life it is to be a judge, and that's what I want to be. I don't want to be anything else. And so now this was later when I was in law school. See, that's when I decided, when I started practicing law. So most of the judges come as a result of just being a district attorney, or from some political appointment, but the governor or some way like that. Well, I decided that the way you ought to have some kind of judicial experience, and so I ran as a town justice in the town of Carroll back in 1958, and got elected, and was elected for 3 4-year terms for 12 years, and so that gave me some background with some experience, especially with my experience as an attorney, as a tax attorney and appraiser for the county. That gave me the background to run as a surrogate, and so that really probably was a highlight, was being elected as surrogate, and having the support of all of the political parties, which was really very unusual. It doesn't happen today, and it happened. I ran 3 times. I ran 3 times as surrogate. The second and the third times I was also ran it on all of the parties. So it was most fortunate to be there at the right time.
And what a thrill to have your son.
Yeah. Well, then, of course, that was a great thrill too. That to have Stephen follow me and wanting to be a lawyer. But he always wanted to be a lawyer. See, where I never had wanted to be a lawyer, I always wanted to be a baseball player or a coach.
Yeah.
Well, ever since he was little, he always wanted to be a lawyer because he saw me and he saw his grandfather, and so that's he had always wanted to be a lawyer. And of course, my oldest daughter, Susan, she's an attorney also, and wanted to be an attorney. So.
Yeah, it's a terrific legacy, the whole family.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. This has been fun.
Well, thank you for inviting me to come up here and talk about some things that have happened to me and Justice Jackson.
That's great. And in June sometime, hopefully, I'll get a confirmation shortly, Gerhardt will be here, as well as his secretary. His secretary has been with him since 1948.
Is that right?
And she, together with Gerhardt, would go down to Washington and interview Jackson and Elsie Douglas all various times from 1948 through 1954 when he died. So she has as much corporate memory about Jackson as the person as does he. And I thought, how wonderful to have somebody who's a secretary. Both of you guys come up, be our guests, because in reality, we as lawyers probably not much of anything without a tremendous secretarial staff.
Absolutely.
You know, we got to honor that.
We certainly do.
And so they're perfect examples.
Oh, I think that's just marvelous, and I wished I had known that he was alive when I was doing the research. I should have checked that out, and but I didn't. But that is the greatest book on his life, and it was very well done, and I'm looking forward to meeting him this summer.
Yes. Well, so I hope he'll come back. I also talked to George Niebank.
Oh yes.
Just the other day, and said, if you're going to be back, we're going to focus in on Jackson because of Eugene Gerhardt. And you certainly clerked with Jackson for 2 years, and getting your insights on Jackson would be equally terrific, and why don't the two of you guys be our speakers? And George said, well, that might work, because June 10th, which I believe is a Saturday, he's coming from South Carolina to Buffalo to attend his 50th law school reunion in Buffalo.
Is that right?
And I said, perfect. If you come up a few days early, not only would I like to do what I'm doing with you, tape you, but at the same time, be part of the program.
Sure. Well, that'd be wonderful.
We'll have a
Yeah.
Bob Jackson
Yeah.
reflection.
Well, like, your wife used to do all this. She used to bring all these people, and I remember when she brought Judge Wachtler in, and of course, it's too bad what happened to Judge Wachtler, but sometimes women will do that to people,
That's right.
But he was a very brilliant man too. I felt terrible about that when he got involved in that case and indicted, and it's strange that what happened to him.
Brad,
Yes.
Cindy's online too. She said you were expecting her call.
Oh, take a message. She's just going to tell me where I'm supposed to meet her tonight.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
But Cindy used to be very active in bringing in speakers, and so I'm glad to see you've taken over for Cindy.
Yeah, but I can't compete with that. Short of getting Rehnquist to come up here, she brought in the chief judge of the Court of Appeals, and he was
Yeah.
terrific. He corresponded with Cindy quite frequently thereafter. And she got him to Chautauqua to speak, actually twice. But I've never seen anybody more devastated. The Sunday morning we opened up the paper and that whole Wachtler story unfolded. And
Oh.
Cindy was just crushed because she
I know she thought the world of Judge Wachtler. But yeah, you ought to get Rehnquist up here.
yeah.
You know, Rehnquist is a very good friend of my sister and my brother-in-law. My brother-in-law, Ralph Erickson, is an attorney. He was with Jones Day. He just retired, and he's a graduate of Harvard. And he was in the United States Attorney General's office under Nixon at the time that Rehnquist was there. And they're very good friends. And so when my sister and brother-in-law go down to Washington or come east, why they always stop down and see Justice Rehnquist and their wife, and they get together, and when they go out to California, they get together. And it's all as a result of both being appointed under President Nixon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Rehnquist, ironically, I wrote him a letter a week and a half ago to see if he would reminisce about Jackson. I gave him all this stuff that we're having this big show and we're memorializing Jackson, and since he was a clerk of Jackson's, could he memorialize? So I got a call on Tuesday from the clerk for the chief judge to the office here. My secretary took down the notes, and I was out of the office and came back and said, well, I got a call here from it's Judy Tremonti. She's the clerk for Chief Judge Justice, I think that's Rehnquist. I said, I'll take that call.
That was good.
Now this is good. You don't know what
Yeah.
you got. This is big. So I did talk to her. They got my letter, and the judge will, reflect on his days as clerk for Jackson. Unfortunately, when we want to do this, they're still in session. Though I kind of hinted. I said, if he has any way I could entice him to come up to this. He's got to. He said, unfortunately, his schedule's sort of booked out for.
I'm sure it
2 or 3
is.
years.
Yeah.
But yeah,
But that would certainly be wonderful if you.
we would rearrange the dates if Rehnquist said,
Yeah.
I can make July 3rd. I think we'd probably do that.
And of course, he's got a lot of connections with his experience. He, having been with Jackson, why he would be able to tell a lot of stories about Justice Jackson.
Sure. Oh, it would be a terrific and.
And he could talk about some of the cases he worked on that
That's right.
Jackson decided.
Yeah.
And so.
I'm still trying to get from somebody, and maybe this Mrs. Wagner, who was Gerhardt's clerk, sort of Jackson's reaction to the Nuremberg verdicts.
Oh.
When the day was done, you've prosecuted this for roughly a year. The verdicts are announced. So a few got acquitted.
Yeah.
Many 18 of the 21 were found guilty. But then when they started laying out, you're to be hung, you got 20 years, you got 10 years, what was Jackson's reaction to all that? All I know is from a book I read, he was livid that one of the certain defendants got it and was acquitted.
Yeah, I think that there were some that should have been convicted and didn't.
Yeah.
But that's the way it is in all
Oh, absolutely.
criminal cases. You can go right back to the O.J. Simpson case. You want to talk very recent. So, but he certainly was America's advocate, as Gerhardt wrote there, and I'm very anxious to meet him.